between my earlier interactions and discussions on the Brahmaputra over a decade ago to now, I see a certain flexibility of approach and a certain opening of mindsets being reflected in the discussions here. I commented Tejaswini for an excellent presentation. But as Mr. Pandya pointed out, the river has to be looked as a composite whole. It has to be looked as a basin. It has to be addressed with as a sum of its parts, not the part of a whole. And this is the tragedy and I attribute it to our history and the legacy of history, where the partition syndrome basically the rivers cannot be partitioned. The job of the water of the river is to flow, and when we stop that flow, the river takes its revenge. I mean, I learned in China that they look at each river as a force of nature, and that the force of nature each river has its own personality, and they have to address the personality as a whole before they can train it. They can never tame it. In India also, you look at the river as representations of deities. They have persona. They have divine persona, actually. And in Bangladesh, the legal system gives each river a legal entity with rights to which we have responsibilities. So it's not a reciprocal. The river has no responsibility for it. A river will just flow and it will flow, and over 60% of the water just flows into the sea. And our problem is, as again Mr. Pandya pointed out, that most of the Brahmaputra waters, for the greater part of the year, 8 to 9 months, the source is from what I have described as the lower Brahmaputra. That's after it makes its U-turn at the Great Bend and falls into Arunachal. Okay. The upper Brahmaputra can affect us to some extent, but for the greater part of the year, it is the lower Brahmaputra. And 60% of the water we just allow it to flow through Bangladesh. Unless we get away from this concept of resource nationalism, you can apply nationalism to many, many things, but you cannot apply the nationalist rules to shared commons which flow to everyone. I think this is one of the problems which you have within India also, because in your constitution, you have given the sovereignty of the river to each state. And because of that problem, you have the perpetual, for the last 80 years, the problems between the southern rivers. You have not been able to resolve it. So if you have not, and now you're also getting increasing problems also on the Himalayan rivers coming down. The Ganges, for us, it flows through 6 states of India or 7 states, I've forgotten, before it enters Bangladesh. Okay. And so you already have disputes developing between the states in India as to what will be done with the waters. So we cannot talk of rivers as sharing a division of the spoils. Unfortunately, that is the paradigm and the narrative into which we have locked ourselves in. And politics, whether it's domestic politics or transboundary politics, sort of reinforces that. We have to get away from it. And I think here we have to look at the example of the 2 European rivers. I mean, the Rhine and Danube, they've had governance frameworks for about 200 years. It's even before the world wars and the different wars they fought with each other did not adversely impact on how they managed the rivers. They understood that everybody's well-being and life depended on that. And I think that is where we have to move to. So the suggestions made by Tejaswini in our papers, I think that is a good pathway in trying to, because we all need to understand the nature of the river, and we can only do that if we are working together. And I would strongly suggest, Commander Das, that you take an initiative. I was in a meeting about 3 months or 4 months ago, where there were Chinese participants also on discussing the Brahmaputra, where Anamika was also a partner. And I think we need to carry that forward. You know, when I first told the Chinese some 8, 10 years ago that, look, let us look at the Brahmaputra as upper and lower because we can't get funding from international agencies if a river is disputed. So first they were reluctant to accept the idea, but when I explained to them that, look, we cannot stop water flowing to you. You have all the means of stopping the water flowing to us. But the reality is that 70% of our water is after the river crosses into Arunachal. So let us deal with that ourselves. Of course, now they have brought up again that the dispute on the territory on Arunachal. But that, I think, is something we can still work around. Okay. So we have to work. Bangladesh as a state has been always saying, and particularly since 2010, that let us focus more on management, holistic management of the river basin, rather than focusing our attention on contested disputes of how much share we are getting on each side. And perhaps that will lead us to a situation where we will be better able to strap some water, hold it when we have less water, and use it, during the drought season. And in the surplus, we have to think about how to control floods. Now, yesterday or day before yesterday, I read a newspaper report which was alarming because, well, I was aware that of the fact that the glaciers are retreating at an alarming rate. They may disappear by the end of the century, or at least 80% will be gone. But the permafrost is also disappearing. And rivers are changing the course, because rivers, as living entities, they adapt to whatever resource they're getting. And the changing of courses, I think we need to focus on what's going to happen and start taking measures on how we are going to protect the communities that are going to be affected. So these are my preliminary comments on this. This discussion, I hope you will share it with us also. Certainly, it's a additional volume. But what I'm hearing is that everybody is talking more and more about, my good friend Sumit also mentioned the same thing. We have to now look at the rivers more holistically, and we have to think about managing it. If it's a persona, whether in your mythology or on your belief system, or in our legal system here, or in the scientific manner with the Chinese, then the persona cannot be, you cannot think of carving up the persona, dissecting it, and one person taking one arm and the other person taking one leg. You have to think of how you live with that persona to make it healthy. That's the approach we should take. Thank you.